Cool. All right. Welcome back to Vijñapti. It's been a minute since we recorded last. I'm here with a good friend of the show, Nick Haight. Nick, it's good to have you back. And today we're going to be talking about the three mysteries. And I don't really have any plan for today. Yeah, I'm just going to ask whatever comes to the top of my head, and we'll just get into it. Usually, I'll send Nick like a few questions beforehand, and we'll kind of go based off that. But I don't have anything today. Just gonna kind of freestyle.
Hey, it's always best to improvise.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Nick, yeah, great to have you back. And take it away. What are the three mysteries of esoteric Buddhism?
Yeah, so the three mysteries are interesting because they have this very strongly esoteric connotation, but they sort of go beyond just the secret initiatory stuff. So I'm going to start by describing them as generally and as, broadly as I can, and then I will start working specifically towards how they're used and how they're understood and what makes them mysteries. So um, to begin with, they are simply three modes of behavior or of action for human beings or sentient beings in general in esoteric Buddhism. And the three are mind, mouth, or words or speech, and body. So we have verbal behaviors, that which we say. We have our moral behaviors, that which we do, which I guess counts with what we do with our bodies. And we have that which we think or that which we perceive, and that is our mental behavior. So these are just simply
Body,
three,
speech, mind. Those are the three.
yeah, body, speech, mind. And these are simply three gates through which we receive, you know, reality and through which we put out our actions, put out our behaviors. So they're gates that go both directions, and that which goes through them can be good, bad, or neutral. So we can send out good behaviors through good thoughts, through good action, through good speech. We can receive good thought, good speech, good action, or we can receive bad, do bad, etc. And there's a very specific, very tightly linked relationship between that which goes out and that which comes in through those gates. And that relationship is karma, right? So if you put out bad, you get bad back in. And if you put out good or neutral, you get good or neutral back in.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. I wanted to take one big step back because I think this is kind of important to clarify for the scope of what we're talking about. When we say mysteries, what are you talking about when you say mysteries? What are you referring to in that term?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked about that. So the reason why these are called the three mysteries, or in Japanese, the sanmitsu, is that there's the exoteric or the obvious, and that is our everyday mundane behaviors, our everyday mundane morality, the
Mhm.
things that we see and experience just all the time while we live. But then there's the esoteric, the hidden, the secret. In the word sanmitsu, the mitsu component means secret or hidden or mystery. And the secret or hidden or the mystery stuff is the mental, verbal, and physical behaviors of Buddhas. So the secret stuff is the enlightened stuff. It's the stuff that transcends the good, bad, neutral morality that we're used to. It's the activities of fully enlightened Buddhas. And so that's what makes them mysteries, right? So you can call these the three gates, and they kind of represent everything that you and I and all other enlightened beings do. And then you can call them the three mysteries, that which all Buddhas do all the time. And so that's what makes that distinction is that. And so to be more specific, I've said the three mysteries are those things which Buddhas do, the mental, physical, and verbal behaviors of Buddhas. What are they actually doing? The answer is with speech, they are saying mantra. With their body, they are making mudra poses. And with their minds, they are making mandalas. And so these three practices are very, very prevalent and very specific to esoteric Buddhism. And their goal is to act like a Buddha and therefore become one in this
Mhm.
very body. If you do the behaviors of Buddhas, that is understood to be the absolute most instantaneous or expedient fashion through which a person can go and enter the realm of Buddhahood in this
Hmm.
life, in this very body. And the reason that that's very important, the reason why there's this urgent need to do it so super fast, is because there's a whole history of Buddhism that precedes the development of esoteric Buddhism, where the Theravada Buddhists, or the ancestors of the current present day modern Theravada Buddhists, they were practicing enlightenment or the path of enlightenment by means of morality. So they they attach themselves to very strict moral rules, and these moral rules were supposed to be exertions that they could undergo to inch by inch make it to enlightenment. And it was said that it would take 3 mahakalpas, and one kalpa is like somewhere in the many billions of years, and a mahakalpa is that times like 84,000. So billions and billions of years times 84,000 times 3. That's how concretely long it was thought that that path would take to turn you into an enlightened being. Not yet a Buddha, just an enlightened being. So then
Yeah.
Mahayana comes around after that, and they come up with all sorts of shorter, more expedient means. Expedient means is a direct translation of the Sanskrit word upaya. These are ways to skip the line and to get to enlightenment or to Buddhahood faster. The popularization of the bodhisattva path is one of these more expedient means they understand to be faster than the alternative. But even that takes a long time. Even that is understood. You can't become a bodhisattva in this life. You can start your path, but you cannot finish it in this life. You have to be reborn over and over and over again. And for esoteric Buddhists, that sucks because you still have to see and experience and deal with suffering in in that time period that it takes for you to become a fully realized Buddha. And so in order to accomplish the goal of the bodhisattva path, which is to save all sentient beings in the quickest, most immediate fashion, these three mysteries are practiced. Because what better way to realize Buddhahood in this life than by doing none other than what Buddhas themselves do. So
Hmm.
that's sort of the significance and the importance of it. And it's understood to be secret because the activities of Buddhas don't operate necessarily on the level of the conventional and the perceivable. They operate on the very subtle and the very, maybe you could say, the level that is paved over by most sentient beings' own entanglements, their attachments, their notions, their conceptions. We have these ideas about self, about the world, about how it works, about our place in it. And that prevents us, that keeps us from seeing the nature of Buddhahood, from seeing the nature of Buddhas. And so, that being the case, we don't often see their activity, right? But if we break through that stuff, if we let all that stuff go through the initiatory practices and rituals of esoteric Buddhism, we can have access to these three secrets, these three mysteries, these three
Yeah.
things which are the activities of Buddhas, and we can realize Buddhahood in this life, in this instant, in this body, in a very immediate fashion. And so that's sort of that's the, maybe you could say, the Cliff Notes version of the three mysteries.
Awesome. Thank you. No, that was great. I so we're still talking about Buddhism. I'd like to zoom out a little bit more, and I guess that's what you get when you don't start with any notes or beginning topic. Um, I want to approach the notion of mystery from a very broad scale, I guess from a religious scholarship standpoint, and just looking all at all religions. Um, to my mind, the essence of what mystery is essentially is mystical experience. And I feel like that's kind of where that comes from. And I talk a lot about experience and a lot about phenomenology and um, but I like to do it for a reason, and I think kind of like what I thought of as you were saying all that, and you can kind of tell me if this is misguided or if it's kind of on the right track. I see the three mysteries, and specifically I'll talk about mudra. And I'd really like to dive into these each individually in the future, and we can go over in way more detail. But I almost see mudra as kind of like communion with God, with the divine, with the Buddha, with reality, with whatever. Um, and obviously communion is a very Christian, very Anglo-European way of thinking about religion and religiosity and all that. But I also think that there's something very helpful in thinking about it that way, and that it implies that there is a connection and that you actually enter into relationship, or that you realize relationship. And maybe the relationship was already there, but you just didn't see it, or something like that. But essentially that you are becoming unified with something beyond yourself, or that is essentially yourself, or whatever. So that idea of communion, I like it in this context of thinking about religious mystery in the broadest sense. What do you think about that idea? Do you think it's accurate? Do you think it's too Christianized? What do you think?
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to, so I'll come around to this because I think this is a great topic, but I wanted to briefly mention when you said mysteries in the broadest sense speaks to this idea of mystical experience. And I just wanted to check the etymology of that word. And so while you were describing that, I found that, and it turns out that um, the Greek origin for what we now say mystic or mystical or mystery, the Greek origin would be muin or muin, which is close the eyes or lips. That's what that means. Close the eyes or lips. So it's like unseen, unknown, unknowable. And then it
Okay.
eventually turned into mustez, which is initiated person. So initiated persons have access to that which is mysterious or mystical,
Yeah.
and or otherwise mystery or mysticism initiates them into mystical experience. And so I think that that's a very appropriate etymology for that word. I think that's fantastic, and I think that that applies very widely across lots of different religions. And then coming back around to the idea of mudra, mandala, and mantra as communion, not in the sense of like, this is the body, this is the blood, but in the sense of a realization of oneness. That's absolutely right on the money. That's absolutely right on the money. And I think that, so you use the example of mudra, and that's true, but it also applies to mantra and mandala. So
Oh,
the reason why, so Shingon Buddhism, Japanese Shingon Buddhism, the Japanese word Shingon means true words. And Shingon is unique because it is one of the most prayer oriented or mantra oriented sects of Buddhism in the whole world. And the reason that they, or the mechanism that they say that allows prayer to work, is that you are saying the words of Buddhas, which are inherently, fundamentally, absolutely true because they are the Dharma. And also, the reason that they work is that when I say a mantra, I have shared nature with all other sentient beings. That shared nature is Mahavairachana. That's, Dainichi. That's the main Buddha of esoteric Buddhism. We are
mhm.
all manifestations or emanations of that Buddha. And so you could think of that shared nature as constituting threads between all of us, right? Threads that connect all of us in some way or the other. And whenever we say true words, whenever we say mantra, you could say we are plucking those threads, like a guitar string. We're plucking those threads in some way, or we're sending something along those threads. And so these special words, which are distinct from all other conventional everyday words that we use, you know, in our everyday language, these words sort of exert power on reality, on the world around us, because those words are of a nature of Buddhas, and so are we. And because of that shared nature, this reaction or this sort of empowerment happens. And so that's the mechanism by which mantra works. Mudra also works. Um, Mudra are actually, in Shingon Buddhism, they're actually entirely initiatory. So I don't actually know any, or those that I do know, I should not know. And
Mhm.
so, everyday people, the only two mudras that we are allowed to have and use and practice are this prayer hands, just two hands together, which is a show of gratitude and a show of understanding and um, a show of unity and peace, right? And the other one that we're allowed to use is this. I'll angle the camera down so you can see. You do your hands just like this, and you sit them on your lap.
Okay.
If you look at statues of the Buddha in Japan, a lot of them are doing this, and that is the meditation mudra. So that's
Right.
the mudra of contemplation or visualization,
Hmm.
exertion early on in your practice. Um, these are sort of, I don't want to say that they're basic because they are very important and very enlightened and enlightening, but they have simple use. Simple use. You'll often see statues of Vairocana where he's doing this mudra. So he's got his index finger up, and all these fingers are wrapped around, and the other index finger is over the top. This one is a lot more complicated, right? This is one that, I'm only replicating from what I've seen. I'm not allowed to have this. But the meaning of it, as I understand, is Mahavajracana is embracing all sentient beings in his great compassion. And so you may be tempted to think, if you're listening to this show, you may be tempted to think that it is symbolic of his embracing all sentient beings. It's just a motion that signifies that this is what he does, right? It's not him actually doing that. But in esoteric Buddhism, it's actually understood that he is actually doing, when he does this mudra, he is actually embracing the entire world. And the reason why is related to the secret, the thing that is secret in esoteric Buddhism. We've talked about it before on the show as an open secret, but the secret is that Vairocana is the entire universe. And so when he does stuff, he's doing it on a universal scale. So I've heard this index finger compared to an axis mundi, or a sort of a pole point between this world and the heavens or the divine or something like that. And he embraces all of them in his great compassion. And so he's literally surrounding the entire world with his great compassion, and that's his activity. That's his function. That's his behavior as a Buddha.
I
And
guess
so,
Eliada wasn't too off after all.
do what?
I guess Eliada wasn't too off base after all.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. And so that's like literally happening when he does that mudra, because he's the whole universe.
Hmm.
And then finally, mandala is also a communion, a oneness. Mandala are expressive of the mind of a Buddha, and they're also expressive of the totality of all existence. And so, in that way, they are also they're sort of microcosms of all of everything, right? They're sort of all of reality all together all at once. And because of that, they are also obvious. They're sort of like they're obvious representations of communion, of the unity and the inclusivity of all things in the mind of the Buddha, in the Dharmakaya. So
Hmm.
that's the mechanisms by which all three of these are on the level of communion, on the level of the realization of unity between all things.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I um I feel like I lean really heavy into like emergence and, being not sucked into this like reductive model of or view of the world. But I'm not just doing it to like, try and balance the scales or whatever. Like I very do, and I think Buddhism would very much agree that we do miss this very critical experiential, existence and domain. And and so I was going to ask, either from your perspective or from a Buddhist perspective, we covered Thompson's book, and we've seen many of the, I guess, kind of unskillful ways of thinking about Buddhism. Um, but I do very much think that there is something to this, like you can commune with the mystery, you can commune with the secret, you can commune with reality, even if you don't believe in a religion, even if you're not a Buddhist, even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't believe in, God or spirits or whatever. Do you think that's accurate? Do you think that's possible?
I absolutely do. I think that the way that Buddhism would frame it would be you have to create the correct causes and conditions for such a thing to occur. And that in itself is not a terribly religious sounding statement. That's not a terribly sectarian sounding statement. It's just simply if you want something to happen, you have to set it up to happen. You have to cause it to happen. And I think that that's true regardless of it being the Buddhist frame for how to have that sort of experience. Now, specifically, what the causes and conditions for a realization of the three mysteries in esoteric Buddhism, that might be a very heavily religious thing. But
Hmm.
just in general, communing with having mystical experience, communing with the secret stuff of reality, you have to cause that to happen. I just think that that's universally true. I think that whether you know it or not, there is a sort of circumstance in which that happens, and whether someone who has had a mystic experience knows it or not, they have landed themselves in that circumstance somehow. And I think that that's crucial to having it and crucial to facilitating it. And I think that it's possible to do that, and I think that it happens pretty frequently across history and across time. And I think that it's mostly a positive thing. There are some cases where it's not, but I remember we talked about that scholar on YouTube and his discussion of mystical experience through a philosophy standpoint, and that
Uh,
was
Justin Sledge.
that's right. Yeah, he had a very interesting perspective on it, and I remember us saying, basically, if this mystical experience doesn't lead to like basically a realization of great compassion, then it's not real. It's a made up, it's a lie, right? It's something that didn't actually happen. And I still
Mhm.
stand by that. I think that these mystical experiences are accessible and they are usually positive for the
And
person
just to
having
be
them.
clear, you're not saying the content isn't like real. You're saying that the person is actually lying about having the experience.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just to clarify, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just
Yeah, yeah.
who didn't listen to that episode before.
Yeah, that episode he was saying, there's no way to compare or no standard by which to evaluate mystical experiences because the content varies according to the sources themselves. And while he's right that the sources themselves are the only sources we have, my thinking, though I may be falling victim to modern Western post Protestant morality, is that if you have a mystical experience or claim you have one, and you claim that that mystical experience has enlightened you to the fact that we have to make women subservient to men or we have to genocide a certain race, my response is just going to be you're lying. You didn't have a mystical experience. You just wanted to do that stuff anyways. And then you made up the mystical experience to sort of give it divine justification when it really doesn't have any.
Right. And this is where I actually, I like to think that I'm pretty objective when I look at Buddhism and religion in general. This is where I think Buddhism can actually shine when it comes to, I mean, we're having something of a psychedelic renaissance right now where we're exploring the therapeutic benefits and people are, you know, taking psychedelics all around the world. Well, as you mentioned, yes, a lot of the time they're positive, but a lot of the time they can be pretty devastating. And even if they don't feel devastating, there is a very real risk of, people talk a lot about ego dissolution. Well, there's ego inflation as well. That's, another type of mystical experience where it's, I'm the greatest person who ever lived, and so everyone should serve me. And, basically whatever Trump is thinking before his head hits the pillow at night. With this very narcissistic type of mystical experience. And that kind of mystical experiences real in the sense that people have them. But then, you come back from that and you're like, huh, well, according to whatever ethical framework, and it can be one that you made up. It doesn't have to be religion or philosophy or whatever, but just according to, something, you can come back and say, well, hold up, maybe that one wasn't, a good way to think about the world. Maybe I can reject that one. Maybe I can learn from it, but reject it. So, just briefly, I just wanted to say, like, it's very good and profound that people have these experiences, and they should. But we also need to have some sort of ethical framework to interpret those experiences when we're,
Mhm.
when we're coming back from them. Um,
I agree completely, and I think that it's interesting to observe in history and in different cultures how ego dissolution and ego inflation, whichever one people have in the moment, gets filtered and digested through a an existing ethical framework in that culture, that time period, that place, that situation. You know, someone could very easily have an ego inflation moment and then come back and say, okay, I'm God and the whole universe. My duty as God and the whole universe is to make everyone's lives better, make everyone's suffering and their unhappiness go away somehow, right? That's like a very positive outcome through which, you filtered your mystical experience through ethics and through morality. And similarly, if you have ego dissolution, then you have this idea of like, oh, there's no such thing as self, there's no such thing as a soul. Emptiness, basically, according to the Buddhist concept. And so, for that reason, I must be compassionate and end this cycle of continued arising because there is no such self, even though we are deluded in thinking there is. And so, the only way to save people from that delusion and save people from the downstream effects of that is through compassion and being nice, being good. And so it's interesting to see how both types, inflation and dissolution, can lead to someone committing themselves to a compassionate life.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, I agree. And very much I'm willing to bet that the kinds of mystical experiences that Jesus of Nazareth had are not very well reflected in white Southern American culture in the US for the most part. Sorry. If you're
Absolutely, no,
a
it's
guy
true.
from the South and you are a Bible thumper, sorry. Everyone gets picked on. No sacred cows here. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, we I think Aristotle said, like, the goal of action is contemplation. So yes, we should have these experiences. I think that's very much part of what it means to be human. But we also need to, okay, you know, chill out, put the DMT away, journal a little bit, talk with my therapist or my best friend or whoever, and try to make sense of it in a way that allows you to be compassionate, do good in the world, and and whatever. Um, cool. So, I think that was a nice little segue for a little bit. Um, let's get back to the three mysteries, and I for this one we can kind of just stay general, like I said. I think we already covered a decent amount though. Um, yeah, oh, okay. I guess this is just kind of a passing thought, and we can kind of just go from there. So for Mudra, I'm thinking of kind of have you seen Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yeah, yeah, I have.
Yeah. So you remember where Aang goes to the temple and he like meets all his like past lives and reincarnations, and they're all kind of sitting like doing the mudra, and then they all
Hmm.
like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you get so that's what I'm thinking when I think mudra. Like, you put your body in this pose, you go into this state, I guess, and then you commune. In this case, he communes or unifies or whatever with like his past lives or his higher self or whatever. Is that kind of right when it comes to, not just mudra, I guess, but like all of them, all of the mysteries?
Yeah, so that's an interesting bit. I'm glad you brought up Avatar because that show is so deeply steeped in East Asian culture and East Asian like motifs, and draws so heavily on East Asian religions, in particular Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And the Air Nation in that show is, I mean, so like very clearly and obviously based on Tibetan Buddhists and Central Asian nomads, which,
Mm-hmm.
in history, in certain periods of history, were also Buddhists. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's very interesting to see how that plays out in the show, and how that can serve as a way that people can sort of relate with and experience like Buddhism in practice and lived culturally, rather than having it be presented to them. This is Buddhism. This is what these people all do. This is what this is like, right? This is what it looks like, sounds like, smells like. It's very subtle. It's set dressing more so than it is beaten over your head while you're watching. And so I like that a lot. Um,
Yeah.
it's a good show. Highly recommend. On the topic of the mudras in the past lives, so mudras all have very specific functions. They all have very specific moves that they do, right? Um, in fact, in Naruto, uh, all of the different like hand poses for them doing magic or whatever they do, all of
Yeah.
those are based on mudras as well. Um,
Okay.
and the idea of these mudras causing something to happen, magical to happen, those that's very much based on esoteric Buddhism, on Shingon Buddhism. And so whenever Aang sees his past lives, when he communes with the divine, that is one function of mudra, of mantra, of mandala. You can meditate on past lives, and that is something that you actually do have to do according to the sutras in order to become a Buddha. You have to reflect on your past lives and come up with some sort of knowledge or details about them without, and you have to be honest about it. You can't just like make them up. You can't just be like, in a past life I was a firefighter, and then the one before that I was a basketball player. You can't. You have to have like, you have to genuinely set up the conditions for which you understand and experience your own past lives. And
Mm-hmm.
in the show, Aang has done that, and he has seen his past lives and communed with them. In Buddhism, you can't really talk to them like that. They don't. You can't really have conversations. I think that was part of the magic of the show. I think it was a little bit of Hollywood magic, and a bit of like plot magic,
Yeah.
which is fine. They can do that. But in Buddhism, you definitely can't talk to your past self like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so whenever you're doing different meditations in Buddhism and different visualizations and different contemplations, you get these different mudras that go along with them. And sometimes they're turned towards you, the practitioner. But a lot of times they're turned towards all sentient beings everywhere. So there's mudras that are typically done while you're praying and while you're contemplating the mandala, and their function is to sort of make something happen out in the world around you rather than concerning you yourself, right? And the stuff that concerns you yourself, maybe it does happen and I just haven't seen it because it's all initiatory, it's all secret, and I'm not initiated. But most of what I have seen is outward facing rather than inward facing. But it does function in a similar way. I mean, you are sort of invoking or communing with the Dharmakaya of Mahavajrayana. You're invoking or acting according to the world being the divine rather than being that which we see every day due to our entanglements and our notions and our conceptions.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, and I think that's easier to like, and for me anyway. I'm very much like a physical kind of learner. But for me, it's much easier to understand it like in that sense through mudra, just because it's like at least how I imagine it, like you can kind of see the because like at a purely physical level, like we're all made of atoms, our bodies use energy, like it's all physical stuff. I mean, yes, I'm not a fan of exclusively looking at reality through the reductionist mechanical view of things, but that is what it is at a certain level.
Yeah.
And um and so I guess I see mudra kind of as like the literal embodiment of that truth is like you are one with the universe. like always. You are the universe always. It's just, you can't see it. Like I have this space, I have this body, whatever. Um, but and um I like I'm almost I see like yoga kind of as a very easy alternative to communion, just in the sense that I'm pretty sure yoga like literally means union in Sanskrit, or like union between two things, like the person and reality or whatever, but it means like union or connection or relationship or something like that.
Yeah, it means so it's interesting. I love Indo-European languages like Sanskrit because sometimes you can see very obvious roots to words that we have in English. It means to yoke, like an
Yo,
ox is yoked to a wagon. And so
okay.
yeah, the practitioner is yoking themselves to the path, to the object of their practice, to reality, to
What is what
insert
is
thing here.
what does yoke
Yoke,
mean?
like to attach yourself. Like, have you ever
Mm,
seen like a horse-drawn carriage? Like the horse is yoked to the carriage.
okay, gotcha. I should probably know that one, but
It's fine. It's not right. It's not really widely used that much anymore.
yeah, I guess with cars and everything.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it means to like, attach yourself. Like you know,
Okay.
you've like glued yourself to your practice, to your object of worship, to your path, whatever that is. And that is what yoga kind of implies.
Yeah. I guess in that sense it's and I could be wrong here, but I could see like where the austerities come in, or where the notion of austerities come in. Like it's not just, oh, just do whatever you want. And maybe I'm reading into it a bit too much, but if I'm thinking of like a horse attached to the carriage, it's like, well, he's on there. He's pulling that carriage, and that's what he's going to be doing for, however long. And so with the austerities thing, it's kind of like, I imagine like very strict asceticism. There's some guys in India who will like have stuff like welded around their neck, just like until they die. And, it's supposed to like induce pain to remind them of the present. And, you know, like I guess I'm thinking of attachment in that way. Like you're committed
Yeah.
to that path.
One of the most interesting examples of that I've seen is there's a Hindu practitioner who has kept his right arm straight up for, I think like over 50 years now. And it's
Oh my
incredible. I
God.
mean, doctors have looked at his arm. He's an older man now. He's probably in his 70s if he's still alive. He showed up in a religion textbook, and so that's why I know about him. But he held his right arm up for that long, and doctors have looked at him and they have seen that his arm can't go back down ever. They would have to break the bones in order for that to work, and he doesn't have any circulatory system in that arm anymore because the blood can't pump upward. And so when you look at his hands, they're not decomposed in the sense that they're like rotting and gangrenous and like juicy, but they
Yeah.
are like they're withered. They're like almost um,
Oh,
they're almost like immaterial or like inorganic looking. It's very fascinating. And his reasoning for doing this is whenever you do austerities like this in
hmm.
Hinduism and in other South Asian religious traditions, this type of devotion, this type of yoking yourself to a practice, this is like it's harder than really anything a person can do because the commitment spans longer than the human brain can sort of comprehend, right? And so when you do something like that and you actually effectively stick to it, you have generated enough spiritual power that you can sort of leverage that power into something else. So there's all kinds of stories in Hinduism and in Buddhism about people doing stuff like this, and they build up enough what's called tapas. It's spelled the same way as like Spanish tapas, but it's tapas in Sanskrit, and what it refers to is like spiritual heat or like religious heat or energy. And when you have all of that energy, you can like knock over the pantheon of gods, right? If you have enough of it. And so there's all kinds of stories of them of practitioners getting that stuff building up spiritual heat, knocking over the pantheon, and then an avatar of Vishnu or something has to come and fix it. A descendant or a manifestation of Shiva or Vishnu has to come and restore the natural order. But it's really
Yeah.
fascinating because like in those stories, the people who do that are seen as the bad guys because they're upsetting the natural order. But a lot of practitioners in Hinduism today view those people in idealized fashions, and they try to build up tapas themselves and build up this spiritual heat by, raising their arm that far, or fasting for a great period of time, or never washing their bodies, or just different things like this. Just
Mm.
picking something and sticking to it for 70 years or 80 years. I mean, that can you imagine? That's literally your whole life if you commit to something like that.
That's almost, I mean, that's like twice as long as we've been around,
Yeah.
if not longer. Yeah, no, that's very and this is why I love religion. It's just so fascinating. I think that's kind of like, yeah, I think that's where the action's at personally.
I think
Um,
so too.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay. I don't really have any questions left. I guess, and maybe I wanted to ask kind of about the tantric aspect of the three mysteries, or of mystery and whatever in Buddhism. But would you rather wait until next time and we can talk about that like a bit more like historically, maybe like Vajrayana Buddhism and kind of its I don't know, historical component. We don't have to get too deep into the history, but I'm just curious, like, if you'd
However you
want to.
like to do. Yeah, I mean, I've got the time. I can speak at least to what tantra is because
Yeah.
people confuse it often with mantra, um, and they don't know kind of the difference between the two.
Sure. Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, yeah. So mantra is prayer. Mantra is a short recited prayer. So, you know, in in Shingon Buddhism, for example, every Sunday at my local temple, we chant the light mantra or the Komyo Shingon, and that's just one sentence. It's just O Nabo Kyabe Roshano Makaboda Ramani Handoma Jinbara Harabari Taya Un. That's it. That's the whole thing. Tantra is not really a spoken prayer. Like a it's not like a single practice or a single category of practices. It's kind of like an approach to religious practice. And for that reason, it can be kind of difficult to define and to explain. So the Sanskrit word tantra translates to loom, like loom, a loom where you make fabrics or to weave or to warp. And it's kind of fascinating trying to make sense of that. It's kind of an interesting use of the word. I'm not an expert on tantra itself and on tantric practice and tantric texts and stuff,
Mhm.
but I do know that the translation is sort of fabric oriented or weaving oriented, and basically it's just a mode of how you practice, how you understand Buddhism, how you understand religious exertion, how you understand like the theory of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So basically, we've been talking about these austerities so far, and certain austerities kind of fall under the category of tantric. So there's like tantric breathing aspects, there's tantric yoga, there's tantric chanting, and what makes it sort of tantric is the specific type of exertion or the specific approach to your exertion that you're doing. And so it's sort of similar to the adjective ascetic, ascetic, ascetic practices. They are specifically strenuous spiritual practices that lead to like lightning fast enlightenment whenever you've done it, or they lead to lightning fast realization, lightning fast liberation, whatever you want to call it. They lead to some sort of lightning fast result, but they're really hard. They're really hard to actually do. So it's kind of it's an interesting overlap with ascetic in that way. There's some of the practice which I would say is not covered by the word ascetic alone, but we can suffice to say that ascetic covers most of it, and that it is centered in these esoteric traditions in Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism. It's kind of a Central Asian flavor of these things, and so um, it's not a prayer. You could actually do like tantric mantra practice. You can do tantric chanting, breathing. You can do tantric yoga, all kinds of different things. And what makes it tantric is the sort of specific strenuousness and the specific exertion and the specific nature of how you approach it. It's not tantra because it's the thing, right? So there are tantric texts out there that you can read, and those technically count as tantra themselves, but what they all are speaking to is sort of esoteric exertion, esoteric religious activity.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And I guess that is kind of like it ties back into the secret hidden how do you put it? Initiatory dimension of
Mm-hmm.
it. I would imagine, at least within the tradition, it's kind of like, if you misuse these things, you can hurt someone or you can hurt yourself, or, I don't know, you could, cause a lot of problems without knowing the underlying reason and how and why and all that stuff. Um, because it's so, powerful. I don't know what, it's hidden, so I can't really say what that would necessarily entail, but you kind of get my point.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, these practices are described by the monks at my local temple as being like a rocket ship. And if you know what you're doing, if you have created the proper causes and conditions, then it could be a rocket ship to Buddhahood. But if you
Mm,
have no idea what you're doing and you have, looked up the secrets when you're not supposed to know the secrets, then it's like a rocket ship to hell. And so that it's quite literal in that sense. On Bright on Buddhism, I read and discussed the which one was it? It wasn't the Vairocana Abhisambodhi Tantra. We read and discussed the Vajrasekhara Sutra. And the Vajrasekhara Sutra, at the end, it has pages and pages of what would go wrong for you if you have like talked about this stuff to the wrong people at the wrong time, if you've sort of revealed the secret. It basically says, if you like, if you read this or if you transmit this, before you are a fully realized monk or before you're fully enlightened or before you're initiated or have had the Dharma transmitted to you, then, you'll immediately face calamity or tragedy somehow.
yeah.
And it's kind of, I mean, it's to study these things from outside looking in, it's kind of an interesting experience when the thing you're holding, the thing you're reading is telling you that you're doing it wrong, is telling you that like you're doing this will cause some sort of calamity or tragedy. I mean, that's an interesting sort of experience to like to read that and discuss that. And it's like I said, it's an open secret. You can read translations of the Vajrasekhara Sutra online. I didn't like steal this from a monk or something. I found it. I make sure that on that show on Bright on Buddhism that I find sutras in accessible places so that if anybody wants to read them, they can on their own time. And
Mm,
for for that one, I was able to find it on BDK, um, which is stands for Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai. It's kind of like a big translation house for Buddhist sutras. It's a very good resource. I've used it a lot.
mm,
But it's on there and it says, basically what I just said. This is like highly volatile, highly dangerous information that you have in front of you. Use with care.
yeah. Yeah. Um, you know what I thought of when you were saying all that? We've
Mm.
talked about it a little bit before. Akira.
Oh yeah.
That's the first thing I thought of. And if you haven't seen Akira, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about the ending like right now. It's basically about this kid who I forget, like the government steals him away into this like secret program to like enhance like the human mind and basically like turn like the mind into a weapon. Well, they did
Hmm.
that and they were successful with this kid. And he got really strong. He got like God level, like insanely, way more strong than like Naruto and Ichigo and all these, Shonen Jump guys. And he ended up destroying himself in the end, like quite literally, because he couldn't contain the power that he was given in this case by, science experiments or whatever. Um, but he was just a kid. And one, he was way too immature. But two, um, they didn't teach him. And there were other kids in that movie who they did teach them how to use their powers, and they were slow. They were like taking baby steps, like here's how you levitate a little uh play doll or something, or here's how you like, teleport to that end of the room. Like you don't try to take on an army like the first day or whatever. Anyway, I won't say anything else just because yeah, I could go on. I really like Akira. Um
I do too. I love that one.
yeah, yeah. What do you think about about Akira's example?
Yeah, no, that's a really good example because
Kind of.
it
Yeah.
shows like the danger of it shows the danger of being of encountering too much too fast. And it's danger not only to the to you the individual, you know, um, where he like destroys himself and he ends up dying in the end, but he also destroys the entire city or like a part of the entire city. And it speaks to how like you encountering this dangerous volatile information in Buddhism and in other initiatory religions, it's not just dangerous to you, it's dangerous to everyone around you because we have this shared nature. We're all the same, we're all one. And so, you know, this your sin of peeking behind the curtain when you weren't supposed to is the collective sin of all of sentient beings who can't abide their being a secret, who selfishly want something that they are not equipped to handle, right? And that's kind of the way that it's presented and framed in esoteric Buddhism. I think that I respect the initiatory nature of Shingon Buddhism and esoteric Buddhism for, sort of religious reasons and for cultural reasons. Like closed practices and initiatory practices, they absolutely should stay closed and initiatory, and we should not poke and pry into those because those people feel very strongly about those things, and it's harmful to poke somewhere where you're not welcome. But in a principle sort of fashion, you know, especially after watching Akira, I'm kind of like, well, if you play with God, you should sort of see the consequences. You know what I mean? Like the army was the one who stole and experimented on him, and they got destroyed with him. And it's like, well, they kind of got what was coming to them. They kind of got a sense of justice from what happened. It was a tragedy what happened to this kid, and we're only so lucky that it was also a tragedy for them.
Yeah.
Because they sort of were the original transgressors in that plot. And so what I'm saying basically is like I'm kind of an information anarchist about most things. I feel like all information, no matter how dangerous and volatile, should be available to everyone all the time if they want it, if they can find it, if they have use for it, whatever that use is. I think that that's kind of I'm kind of sort of free with all things in that regard. But
Hmm.
of course, I still am respectful of closed esoteric Buddhism. I'm just saying that, you know, I don't think that there's anything so dangerous that that it could be in real life as crazy as it was for the end of Akira. When he blows up himself in half the town.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a reason they don't like, post instructions for nuclear weapons online just on
That's true. Yeah,
WikiHow or anything. And,
Wiki how.
Yeah, and I guess to your point, it's kind of like, well, yeah, knowledge. Maybe we could get into that some other time. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but there, this esoteric stuff, this surface level hidden teaching stuff, like, yes, like historically, there's a certain like, well, oh, those guys over there, that's the surface stuff, but our teachings, that's there's a lot of that. But there's also this very real dimension of like knowledge can be harmful, can be it
Yeah,
can like it can do harm. That's kind of what I'm thinking.
yeah, yeah. And I see that for real. Like I totally agree there. And I see that played out. There's information is not neutral. It's good, bad, and neutral, right? Depending on the context, depending on the circumstances. And I totally agree that, you know, instructions for bomb making on WikiHow would be really bad. It would
Yeah,
be really bad, but you have to admit, from a joking point of view, it would be kind of funny because the WikiHow diagrams are always like so hilarious and ridiculous looking. That's
yeah.
why
I
I
mean,
laughed when you said WikiHow. I mean, it's a really, if you have it, if people are listening, if you haven't gone on, just look up how to do anything on there and you'll see the most ridiculous, like, I don't know, 2D drawn diagrams for how to do stuff. They're really funny looking.
you just see like a stick figure like next to like a atomic bomb or something and tightening the bolts. Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, no, I don't think I have any questions or comments beyond that. Do you have anything that you'd like to close with?
Nope, I don't think so. Thanks for having me on again, and I really enjoyed talking about the three mysteries and continuing the show.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. And next time we'll do a deeper dive, kind of on each of them specifically and individually. Hmm. Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. See you next time, guys. Bye. I don't know.